Welcome to the Deakin Alumni webinar with Dr. Hannah Macdougall. Dr. Hannah Macdougall is an elite athlete, dual Paralympian and bronze medalist. She's a community engagement and resilience advisor, inclusion advocate and wellbeing expert. Hannah is also a Deakin alumnus. She completed her Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science in 2011. In 2013, Hannah received the Deakin University Young Alumni of the Year Award for her outstanding service to her profession and to the community. Thank you so much for being here today, Hannah. I'm going to pass over to you now to begin our presentation.
Awesome. Okay. Welcome, everybody. So we are just going to get started as well with a bit of a visual there. So hopefully you can see me. It's kind of weird not being able to see you all, but that's okay. I'm used to talking to myself. It happens quite regularly. So today's session, entitled A Leg Up to Wellbeing, hopefully we will learn some tools and techniques to give each and every one of you a leg up in your own life. And I think let's get started on a good note. So not only do we like to have legs up, but we also like to sometimes have legs off. So hopefully we'll give you some tools, some skills. You'll hear a little bit about research from my PhD, what that entailed and how that's helped to shape my perception of wellbeing and understanding of it. We're also going to topically talk about Are You Okay? How to ask for help, given that it is Are You Okay Day tomorrow, I think. Yeah, that's right. Coming up shortly. You'll also maybe hear some of my athlete stories as well. So I'm very much a pracademic in some senses. I quite appreciate and evidence-based in terms of tools that we use, but I like to add in my own flavour and things that we're going to talk about today. Some might be more relevant for you than others. So it's kind of like a bit of a buffet. So some mornings you might like the muesli or the bircher. Other mornings you might like some poached eggs with some wilted spinach, roasted tomatoes. Obviously, I do live in Melbourne and we have access to some beautiful cafes. So we're going to be talking about some of these things today. But before I get into that more pracademic side of things with you all, I would like to share with you a little bit of a story. And it was of these kids, and they are, from memory, it was year 4. They went on a school camp. And on this school camp, the teachers had a lot of faith in their kids and they wanted to challenge them. They gave them this challenge of climbing a rock climbing wall. And so they told the instructors, okay, what we want you to do is spread all of these rocks as far away as you can to make it as challenging as possible. Obviously, not either ends of the room, but spread them far apart will make it really challenging for this talented group of kids. So anyway, all of the kids get into their harnesses and their berets and they start climbing this rock climbing wall. And one by one, they start falling off and it becomes quickly apparent that it has been made way, way, way too hard. So anyway, these teachers are standing at the back of the room and they start whispering and muttering to themselves. They're like, oh, crap, we have made this way too hard. And then some of the kids who had already fallen off, they started to hear this negativity and they picked up on it. And so they started calling out to their friends, guys, it's way too hard. Nobody's going to make it to the top of this wall. And your arms are really heavy. Your legs are sore. Nobody's going to make it to the top. It's way too hard. So over time, that ball of negativity, which started out really small, it just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And to be honest, that same ball of negativity was quite similar to the attitude that the doctors had when I was born. So I've made it obvious today in terms of already taking my leg off that I was born with a little bit missing. Just one of those things happens to 1 in every 10,000 people, no rhyme or reason for it. But it has formed, it set me on a path in terms of a Paralympic path for elite sport. But along that path, there has been a lot of obstacles and negativity per se that I've had to come up against. And so similar to that ball of negativity that was created was pretty much the same attitude that the doctors had when I was born. So, they told things to my parents like Hannah will never rollerblade, ice skate, ride a bike, all of this negative crap. Thankfully for me, my parents were pretty switched on. I mean, I'm pretty sure my mum's first thought was, Hannah will get half-price waxing for the rest of her life. I get some pretty good discounts in terms of sunscreen sponsorships, and also, socks go double the distance. So there's a whole lot of good stuff we can do with being an amputee. But part and parcel of that, I've combined being an elite athlete as well as studying a PhD in athlete wellbeing. And I just wanted to put up on this next slide the lens that I bring. So these are the things that have helped shape my view of the world, and it is where I'm coming from. So it's not so much to blow my own trumpet, but this is kind of what's helped form what I'm about to discuss with you all. And then hopefully when we move into that question time, we can talk about some of this as well. So I am a little bit taller this year after graduating from the PhD last year, which is very nice. During that PhD, we did a randomized control trial looking at improving the well-being of parasport athletes. And to do that, I needed some qualifications around mindfulness teacher training, acceptance commitment therapy, motivational interviewing. So I did a few of those things. I'm also currently working at the Victoria State Emergency Services in beautiful, beautiful people down there in the communications team. So I'm the community engagement advisor, and I'm absolutely loving it down there. So thanks, guys, for letting me come out and take the time to do this webinar today. Really appreciate it. And then I'm also an ambassador for different organisations, part of the APC leadership group. But most importantly, some of the tools like mindfulness that we're going to talk about today, I do walk my talk. I practice every day, whether it be just a short practice, 10 minutes, or on the weekends, 30 or 40 minutes. I like to practice what I preach. I'm still, a work in progress, and will probably be a work in progress till the day I park it. But that's the exciting thing about life. So some of the topics we're focusing on today are happiness and well-being. So some pretty cool topics. I mean, people like, Han, what do you do your PhD on? I'm like, well, I got to study happiness for 4 years, which is pretty awesome. Can't say I was jumping for joy during the statistics phase. We'll talk about growth mindsets, but I'm not so fantastic at statistics yet. That's another work in progress. But during that study, what I came to understand is that there's two main theoretical or model pathways, etc., to happiness. However, hopefully people have already picked up on that heading is a slightly misleading, because I wouldn't say, we don't want to put happiness as a destination. Happiness, we need to train our brains to increase our own well-being and increase our own happiness. And if we do put happiness on that pedestal, we're a lot less likely to be happy per se. But when we are looking at well-being, we can break it down into two main theoretical traditions. And for those of you who are sitting there and being like, Han, I don't want to listen to all of your academicness, don't stress. It's not going to be highly academic. There will be some slight flavors in there of research and evidence, etc. But this is very much, I could talk to my grandma about this and she would be able to understand it. So we're not going heavy details in that sense. So hedonia, which is one main area that we can look at in terms of different components of hedonia include, how satisfied are you with your life? And then also positive and negative effect. So positive effect includes different types of emotions such as happy, joy, hope, etc. Whereas negative effect is perhaps more things like anger, frustration, anxiety, stress. So things that are probably a little bit more unhelpful in our lives. Then we have the other side of the flip coin, And that's more to do with our spirit having that purpose, that meaning, that self-acceptance, those relationships with other people. So that's more eudaimonia. So we have these two main traditions, the hedonic and eudaimonic tradition. Guys, there's a massive overlap between those two. They're not two distinct things. And there's even some debate on whether they are distinct, but generally speaking, we do have some evidence to say there's different things that sit in one camp and there's different things that sit in another camp. Saying that, that's a good thing for us, yeah? So we can look to improve both those aspects of happiness, do a combination of both, pick one or two, whatever it might be, and improve our own well-being by those different mechanisms. So just to give a bit of a kudos to some of the fantastic work that has been done. There's no need to reinvent the wheel per se, but just a bit of a nod to people who have probably influenced my thinking and a lot of people's thinking. To be honest, I focused heavily on my PhD within that hedonic and eudaimonic framework, and we looked at well-being and happiness both in a global sense, but then also in a sport-specific sense as well. And we really found that, if things are going okay generally in life, then that's going to infiltrate your ability to have higher well-being as an athlete. And so my thinking would be, I haven't done a PhD in this yet. If anybody wants to put up their hands, feel free. But it would be pretty similar to work and career, for example. So if things are going relatively well in our lives in general, then in terms of your work well-being, that would be relatively high as well. Naturally, there'll be nuances, there'll be outliers, all of these kinds of things. But generally speaking, if we can look to have that really firm base of support to work from, then we're miles ahead of everyone else. So we have run with, the leg up theme, and I think something that's really important for mental health that came out through my PhD research, but also just life in general, is connection. And just to just to put it out there before we go through, the big toe, second toe, third toe, etc., they aren't necessarily in any order. It's just a kind of a recipe that I put together for today. As I said, some might be more relevant for you than others. But this big toe for mental health. So connection. Loneliness is growing as the world's biggest burden of disease. A few statistics here for you. So, loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It is equivalent to being an alcoholic. It is more harmful than not exercising, and it is twice as harmful as obesity. So we have a lot of things that go hand in hand with that. So when we're lonely, we see obesity rates increase, we see increases in blood pressure. So all of these physical health consequences as a result of loneliness. So that's pretty scary. We live in a world where we are more connected, technically speaking. Pardon the pun, I just realised that. Good work there, Han. Than we have ever been before in society, in our human evolution, but we're more disconnected than ever before. So when we look at, if we know that loneliness is a problem that we're having, and how can we form better connections, there's a few things that I'd like to talk to you about today. So when we are socially connected, we kind of have, a bit of a reverse of those things that we talked about just on the slide before, in terms of we're going to be strengthening our immune system, strengthening our hearts, reducing stress and anxiety. There's some research to suggest we might lengthen our life because of all of these interconnections with all the other facets of life. People who are more connected are more likely to be active, etc. So you make better decisions and have better health outcomes. It's this whole kind of conglomerate of things that come together. I think one of my favorite things when we are looking to talk about connection is that we all have two ears and one mouth, and we need to use them in proportion. So I'm actually feeling a little bit uncomfortable talking to you all here at the moment, just prattling on and not being able to listening to you all. So I am looking forward to that 20 minutes at the end. But we have two ears and one mouth, and we need to use them in proportion. And so skills to be able to do that when we are talking to people are, well, perhaps we could practice some reflections in terms of what that person has just said. We could ask some open-ended questions, but also harness your power of curiosity to be curious about that person sitting in front of you. And one of my big tips is when you are sitting with somebody and having a conversation with them, be present. If you can, put your technology away because it's just going to be a distraction. So I believe when I am with my friends or, whatever it might be, I'm going to put my technology away because the person sitting in front of me is more important than that iPhone and anything that iPhone has to say. So that's one of my personal mantras. I'm not always great at it, but generally, that's my mantra. There's also some research around building relationships and different questions that we can ask to increase the strength of those relationships. And it is actually a little bit old. It's from 1988, I think, 1997, pardon me. But it still holds really true in terms of, well, what are some different questions we can ask that'll be useful to strengthen our connections? And so it's things like, tell me about your most treasured memory. Another one is, what do you value most in a friendship? If you could wake up tomorrow, what would be one ability that you would like to gain? And they found through, I think it was a series of 36 questions, and I do have a resource slide at the end for you where you can look up these questions as well as further reading if anybody's interested, that goes through this exercise that you can do. So looking to increase our connections through asking some really good questions. So moving on to our second toe, asking for help. Now, this one was a particularly big one in kind of a bit of an athlete space. So I'm going to put on my athlete hat for a moment here. But I've generally found when speaking to people, we can struggle to ask for help. And personally, I found last year I had my first ever road world championships, and it was in South Africa. And I came fourth in my time trial, and it was a pretty solid effort. We then went into the road race, and I was positioning really well in this road race. And unfortunately, it was lap 2 out of 5 of about a 65-kilometre course. Another girl, accidentally, I hope, just came out of the peloton or this group of cyclists and chopped me a little bit. Her back wheel took out my front wheel. We were coming down a descent, so we're going down, we're speeding along at 45k an hour, and I hit the deck pretty hard. So a whole lot of bark off, i.e. skin. I was actually thinking about it on the way here, how much skin have I lost due to cycling? And I reckon it's probably the equivalent of 2 A4 sheets of paper. If anybody has any tips for scars, feel free to pass them on. So a whole lot of bark off. I might have banged my head a little bit, cracked my helmet, but, in the craze of the moment, you get back up, finish the race. But I came back home and physically I was a complete mess. There was some things going on in my personal life, which resulted in some pretty big changes. So physically we're a mess, emotionally we're a mess, mentally we're a complete mess. And I was working for the wonderful people, the Victorian Institute of Sport down at Albert Park, doing essentially athlete wellbeing, personal excellence work. And I needed to put up my hand and say, I actually need some help here. I needed to reach out and get some psychological support. I was quite specific in terms of, okay, I wanted to see more of a psych who had experience in wellbeing and was perhaps female, located in Melbourne, because I prefer face-to-face. I had my list of things happening. But I felt it was tough asking for that help. And I'm like, Han, you work in this space. You do this you encourage athletes to do this every single day. So if you're struggling to ask for help because you kind of still feel that stigma of, in an environment, in a culture where you need to be strong and resilient, and we haven't really talked so much about mental health until I would say only a couple of years ago. It's like, if you're still feeling that stigma, that culture, that pressure, then, what's it like for other people? So I think the more that we can talk about it and have these conversations and practice it as a skill, the better we're going to get at it, yeah? So in terms of when we do need to ask for help, practice, yeah? Start small, small steps. I forgot to bring my baby leg, but it's essentially like this big, right? So we need to take those small baby steps, yeah? It can be useful to be clear on what support you need. It can also be useful to have the conversation next to someone in terms of it makes it a lot less confrontational. So instead of staring somebody straight down the eye, if you're sitting next to somebody, whether it be in a cafe at the front on the stools or on a bike, walking next to somebody, on the couch, in the car, etc., etc., it's going to be a lot less confrontational. You might feel more comfortable to opening up. Then there's also my suggestion of getting a mentor. So somebody who is outside of your bubble, who can, be supportive of you, but also give you a good kick up the butt when you need it. And just someone to bounce around ideas with. Perhaps that person can provide some reflections for you. So personally, I met my mentor, to be honest, I have a few. But Donnie Elgin came into my life after I was about 9 years old, and saw a picture on a wall. It was of a guy who had one leg, so immediately identified with him. But he had 3 massive medals around his neck and a caption saying Paralympian. And so I turned around to Mum and said, Mum, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a Paralympian. And she was just like, yes, dear, that's nice, whatever. But to her credit, she tracked me down a coach and a mentor, Donnie Elgin. And Donnie has been there since I was 9 years old, since day dot, essentially, of the sporting career. And he has given me some beautiful advice along the way. I'll never forget the first time we met was at Little Athletics on a Saturday morning, 100-metre hurdle race. And Donnie's sitting up in the stands watching this 9-year-old Hannah do this hurdle race. And I think it might be an amputee thing, but, other people might do it as well. I've named my legs. My left leg is called Brutus, so it does everything by strength, whereas my right leg, the one that I have my prosthetic leg on, that's called Julius Caesar, and he does everything by strategy. So the gun goes off for this hurdle race. I start running as fast as I can towards this first hurdle. I get to the hurdle and Brutus clears it, no worries. However, Julius Caesar hasn't quite cottoned onto the fact he can't bend at the ankle. So I clip the top of the hurdle. I fall flat onto the ground. Blood starts pouring out of my knees. My cheeks are flaming red with embarrassment because, this Paralympian, Don Elgin, multiple Paralympian, multiple medalist, extraordinaire, has just seen me fall flat on my face. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? I'm like, learn from past mistakes. So I run as fast as I can to this next hurdle, and I try kind of this like sideways thing over the hurdle. A bit of a scissor kick thing. That did not work at all. Don't recommend that one. I then run as fast as I can to the next hurdle, and I tried to go around it, and the judge was like, nah, Han, that's actually illegal. You can't do that. Anyway, finally made it to the end of this race, and I look behind me, and there's a trail of destruction. 9 out of 10 of the hurdles have been knocked down. So anyway, I walked really slowly up to Donnie, and Donnie says to me, Han, how do you think that race went? And, if I could insert some like sound effects, some cricket sound effects right now, that would be, all of my feedback that I had for him on that race. And anyway, he said, I thought it went really well. I'm like, Donnie, were you watching me or the person next to me who actually left their hurdles up, probably had their, 7 wheat beaks like Brett Lee for breakfast? And he's like, Hen, if you can show me that same perseverance and determination in achieving your goal of becoming a Paralympian, you're going to make it. He nicely shuffled me away from hurdles into swimming and athletics, from athletics into swimming, which was a good move there. Thanks, Donnie. But he also said to me, Hen, if you want this, if you want something badly enough in life, then get off your butt and do something about it. So you can't just expect things to happen to you in life. You've got to make to work it happen, yeah? So having a mentor, you can have that support person outside your bubble to provide that support. So really critical when we are asking for help. So toe 3, purpose and why. This is a good one. So there's a heap of research around meaning and purpose in life. One of them being, there was a study in 2011 on 1,500 adults, and they found that they just used a 6-point scale, and for every 1 point that a person increased on that scale, they had a 20% decrease in their risk for heart attack. There's also other studies where a 2013 study, and I'm just going to bring up the statistic for you. It was a bit of a meta-analysis of 70 studies, and essentially it concluded that when we do have purpose in life, that meaning in life, we are more likely to make better health decisions. So whether it be related to physical health, so for example, exercise, getting enough sleep, all those kinds of things, but also our mental health in terms of forming those connections, perhaps practicing gratitude, etc. These kinds of things, and I'll get into them in a little bit later. But purpose in life is critical, and I like to use a pretty cool analogy. I think it's a good one anyway, and nobody can talk back to me at this point in time, which is cool, of Pirates of the Caribbean #1. So if you haven't seen this movie, I do recommend putting it on the list of things to see. But the title's a bit of a giveaway. It's a pirate movie. It's set in the Caribbean. And there are two of the main characters are called Captain Jack Sparrow, played by Johnny Depp, who's on your screen at the moment. And then another one is Elizabeth Swann, Keira Knightley, the actress. And during this movie, part of the plot is they're trying to track down this ship called the Black Pearl. And in the middle of it, they're stranded on this island in the middle of the Caribbean with this beautiful blue, sparkling crystal water, the palm trees, the white sand. They're sitting there drinking rum because that's what they found on the island. But that's a bit of a side note. Anyway, Elizabeth Swann turns to Captain Jack Sparrow and says, "Why are you so obsessed with the Black Pearl?" And he says to her, "Love, it's not just a ship with a mast, a sails, and a crew. That's what a ship needs. But what a ship is, and what the Black Pearl really is freedom." And that pretty much sums up the reason why I ride my bike. So I've identified that reason why. I mean, my bike is freedom in that sense that it kind of, gives me 2 legs and I can go cycle crazy amounts of kilometers. We're doing a step-up challenge at work at the moment, and I made sure I felt good. I got in 86 Ks on the bike this morning, so I can log that. I can go cycle up mountains and come down them. It's probably one of the reasons I cycle up them in the first place. I can meet new people, travel the world, have adventures, all of these kinds of things. And then I've done the same thing with my work and my career. Like, I've identified why. So looking to do that, or how you can do that, I think is really important. And so I've got some tips on, well, how can we identify that meaning, that purpose? And, Some people have had that since they were 5 or 6. They're like, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon or an astronaut or whatever it might be. But for most of us, it's kind of a lifelong journey to figuring that out, yeah? So we can do things like identifying our values, which I did in my PhD and was really useful for athletes. I had some feedback around, through doing that, they drew this picture for me, and it was absolutely beautiful. It had kind of a pre-program on the left-hand side picture, and it was of this really dark tunnel. And then it had post-program, and it had, some darkness around the edges of the tunnel, but then it said, thanks, Han, there is now light at the end of my tunnel. So through doing some values identification as well as mindfulness, we can see some really powerful stuff. So, but let's start small, yeah? So some questions like, well, what do we want to do with our evening, our weekend, our holidays, for the rest of this day, the next hour, the next 10 minutes? So we just start breaking things down across different areas of life, to identify what it is that we want to do. And then perhaps we might start noticing some themes that give us some clues as to what direction we want to head in. And again, there's some resources for you on some slides later in the presentation. So the fourth toe, a person-first, whole-being approach. So within the PhD, I did a journey, and the first step of that was a systematic review. So essentially we looked at the lay of the land and said, well, what's out there? And then we moved into some qualitative, some interviews where I interviewed a whole bunch of elite athletes, and then we moved into some quantitative research, and then finally that randomized control trial looking to improve athlete well-being. And across that journey, I could talk to you about the strengths that we found for parasport athletes, a whole lot of different learnings and science, etc. But for me, one of the key things was when we were looking at parasport athletes, there was this consistent theme that the well-being similarities of parasport athletes, when we looked to compare that with Olympic sport athletes, always far outweighed the differences. And I think that holds true across life. We share so many more things with our fellow mankind, or womankind, whatever we want to say, with our fellow human species, then we do differences. And we need to train our brains to be able to focus on those similarities and what brings us together rather than those things that tears us apart. So in terms of how we can start doing that, I could spend a whole another afternoon talking to you guys about gratitude and, the evidence that supports how powerful gratitude and giving are, so volunteering. But, a simple gratitude practice, just having that notebook by your bed each night, and writing down things that went well, for example, or things that you're grateful for, whether it be, on my ride this morning, the sunshine was just super, super bright and I was warm and I got a free coffee at the cafe. So being quite specific in that gratitude practice is more effective than maybe just writing general things in terms of, I'm grateful for my family and my friends. So be quite specific if you do take up that gratitude practice. So giving to others is also a really powerful one to enhance our own happiness and well-being. And I think there's who was it? It was the US, not US, but Tal Ben-Shahar, who's a modern philosopher, and he said the Hebrew word for health is natan. And natan is a palindrome, so it's the same forwards as it is backwards. And when we give to others, it's a two-way street, yeah? So we're giving, but we're also receiving. So natan, so we're increasing our health. It's a two-way street. I thought that was a really awesome thing to pick up on. Also sleep. I know we do live in a 24/7 society, Personally, I've trained my friends pretty well, and it gets to 9 p.m. and they're just like, Han, it's pumpkin time. It's time for you to go to bed now. So they kick me out of whatever we're doing. Sleep is absolutely critical for our happiness, our well-being, our resiliency, all of these kinds of things. And it might not be during the night, but even getting a nap during the day, a whole lot of good evidence to support the benefits of that, whether it be a 10-minute or a 20-minute nap. We're going to increase our productivity, our alertness, our attention, our focus, all of these kinds of things. Growth mindsets is another one in terms of really basic example was my statistics one earlier. So a fixed mindset is quite rigid. They don't believe our brain is, kind of the neuroplasticity concept and we can learn and grow, etc. They would say something like, I'm just really bad at statistics, and that's never going to change. Whereas a growth mindset is all about effort and persistence, and the possibility that we can get better. So it would say, and what I would say is, I can't do statistics yet. So I'm opening that door. So that word yet is really powerful to add onto your sentences. And then just a reframe tool. So perhaps, if something's gone wrong, let's name seven helpful things about that. So for example, what are, 7 helpful things about being stopped at a red light? I now use it as an opportunity to practice some mindfulness. And just remember, the sun will shine, but also there'll be some rain and clouds, and change is guaranteed in life, except from vending machines. So just to finish up with the 5th toe, some brain training stuff. Generally, we find we're our own harshest critics, yeah? And I'll never forget, this was really brought to light back in 2006 with the swim team. We had a swim camp, and Carol Fox got us to do this exercise where she just told us, guys, go down to the creek, the river, and pick a rock and bring it back to the room. And so off we all go down. It's just the female of the swim team. And everybody's, picking up these pebbles, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's a pretty good size. And Hannah, being a competitive person, I'm like, I'm going to find the biggest rock I can find. So I find this rock, and it's about, a couple of kilos, probably 5 to 10 kilos in weight compared to maybe a kilo or 2 that everybody else has picked. And we lug it back up to the room. And Carol just burst out laughing. And she's like, well, they say the rock is indicative of the exercise we're about to do. And what she got us to do was to write down all of our limiting beliefs onto this rock. So things like, I'm not good enough, I'm too fat, I'm not fast enough, I can't do this, all of that negative shit. We just wrote it down on the rock, and we had to carry it everywhere for the next 48 hours. So into bed with us, to the toilet. Thankfully, I didn't have to swim with it, but everywhere. After 48 hours, we got to go down to the river, and we made the decision to chuck it away. But we're human beings, and we're always going to have those unhelpful thoughts, right? So that's where mindfulness comes in. It gives us a tool to be able to step back and say, well, do I want to get on that thought train, or do I not want to get on that thought train? And some tips for mindfulness are, again, start small. Let's maybe start with a couple of minutes of practice rather than going, I'm going to do a whole meditation weekend. So starting small with that practice. Using your senses. So what can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you feel? Even what can you taste? Using our senses to bring us back into the present moment. So out of worries about the past, anxiety about the future, bring us back into the present moment. Just some also really other small tips. There's oodles of research to support mindfulness being in the present moment. But I just wanted to say it's still pretty young field in terms of that evidence base. We know it works in some specific scenarios. We've still got a long way to go, yeah? So I just encourage you to, for each of the things we've talked about today, find what's true for you, your own truth, and then start applying that to your own life. And just lastly, sit up nice and straight when you are practicing, because it's really hard to breathe when you're down really low. So be curious in life, in your own happiness and well-being journey. And just to finish off with, before we get into questions, if you remember how those kids had rock climbing wall challenge at the start of this presentation, there was only one little girl that made it all the way to the top of the wall. And everybody down the bottom was just like, how did you do that? Secret recipe? Have you done this before? Have you had lessons? One logical person said, well, why don't we just ask her? And so anyway, she comes down the wall and everybody pounces on her and they go, how did you do it? How did you do it? And she just walked straight past them because she was deaf. So sometimes we need to be deaf to what people tell us we can't do. And I would extend that to say sometimes we need to be deaf to ourselves in terms of all of that unhelpful stuff that we tell ourselves. So we might be using some mindfulness to take that step back. Sometimes we need to be deaf to all that unhelpful stuff, but also remember mental health is absolutely critical. And perhaps we need to just ask the question to the person sitting next to us, hey, are you okay? And remember, it's totally okay to not be okay. So thank you very much. That's enough just me speaking away. We will have some time for questions now, I believe.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was a really wonderful presentation and some really inspirational stories you shared with us today. Great advice and tips for our listeners. So thank you so much for that. It is now time for our question time. So I'll leave a couple of minutes for you to type in your questions now. Okay, our first question. How do you become an effective mentor to promote well-being? This is something I'm curious about as someone who works with young people.
Beautiful. So thank you so much for this question. To be honest, my well-being journey started when, ironically, I entered a competition and it was tell us in 25 words or less one of your happiest moments in life. And I talked about this time where I got a prosthetic leg made when I was 11 years old, and it was my first ever water leg. And so for the first time as an 11-year-old, I got to go down to the beach. It was Bondi Beach, by the way. Just, may as well set the standard high. And for the first time in my life, I was able to literally walk from my towel into the water and jump the waves, which was super, super special. And then we had some prawns and fish and chips after. But I talked about that experience and I won tickets to Happiness and Its Causes conference. And so I got to hear from all of these amazing, amazing people from different walks of life. So there was scientists, there were philosophers, there was just there was people there sharing their stories about the work that they were doing, whether it be in the community, their not-for-profits, etc., yoga, just a whole mix of all of this awesome stuff. And I was just like, wow, this is what I want to do. Like, this is my space. These are my peeps. This is how I can help the world and use my skills. So that was the start of my PhD journey. And I wanted to go an approach where, not a cereal box approach, like I was just kind of pulling out a qualification from a cereal box and it didn't have that substance, that strong foundation underneath it. So that's personally why I went a PhD approach. But in terms of being like more of a well-being mentor per se, I think it's identifying, well, what are your strengths? And then how can I use them to help somebody else? So whether it be in terms of, are you like really good at asking questions or talking, or perhaps science or, numbers, words, whatever it might be, identifying what those strengths are, being curious as to maybe what training there is that could be supportive of those strengths, and then just putting it out there. Because we do not have enough mentors in this world. So I'm sure if you stick up your hand to be a mentor, there will be mentees that stick up their hands pretty fast.
Thanks, Hannah. We had a question from Ruben asking us to put the resource slide up. So I'm just going to share that one while we go through our questions. Okay, our next question from Karen. Thanks for the presentation. I work with young men in wellbeing role in small professional sports. Our national body buys in well to well-being, but a lot is aimed at the elite level, so it's challenging to adapt to semi-pro level. You've given me some good reminders and some new strategies too.
Thanks, Karen. And I would just add to that, the great stuff about most of this wellbeing work that we can do, it's pretty simple, basic stuff that doesn't generally cost a lot of money. So, I mean, practicing mindfulness is for free. Generally, you just need your breath and some space to do it in, yeah? Practicing gratitude, you might need a notebook. Practicing connections and friends, maybe there's a coffee involved. But most of this stuff that's going to help our happiness and our well-being isn't going to cost the earth. Even just going outside, that's a really big one in terms of nature and spending that time outside. That's can be really useful for some people for their well-being as well.
Thanks, Hannah. Our next question from Jessica. Are You OK Day is a great day for promoting mental health and to give people struggling to cope with mental health an opportunity to speak up. If someone reaches out to me that they're not okay, how do I even begin to help? Where shall I start?
Great question, Jessica. If somebody says, if you go, hey, you okay? And they're like, you know what? I'm not actually okay. Then our typical reactions, and you might even notice it running around your body like, what do I do? So my first piece of advice is just to breathe. Never underestimate the power of the breath in terms of helping us to, you might have gone into your flight and fight mode a little bit. So by breathing deeply, having that conscious breath, we're flipping back into our digest and rest and giving ourselves an ability to think a little bit clearer. So first of all, take that deep breath. Second of all, use those two ears and one mouth. So just be there to listen and be present when you're listening. Generally, people, when they open up, aren't expecting solutions for their problems. They just need somebody to listen and to rebound ideas off. However, if they are kind of, this is where I'm at, this is why I'm not going okay, and you feel perhaps out of your depth, there's a lot of resources and people that you can tap into. So, for example, when you're in a work environment, there's their employee assistance program that they can tap into for some free counselling. Beyond Blue is another resource that they can tap into. Kids have, school counsellors at their schools, etc. Athletes have what's known as a personal excellence or athlete wellbeing network and different sports psychologists they can tap into. So it's totally fine to say, I hear you, I want to support you, and I'll be there to support you and walk this journey with you. This is probably a little bit bigger than me. Is it okay if we perhaps talk to, such and such, or look up this resource, etc.? And that's totally fine. I think the most important thing is to create that space and to make people feel that, they can open up and reach out.
Thanks, Hannah. My next question from Melissa. Tips on finding a mentor. Is it something we should be willing to pay someone for?
That's a great question, Melissa. I think it comes back to identifying, being quite clear in what you do need help with. And mentors take many different shapes and forms in terms of the relationship you can have. Some can be quite formal and some can be quite informal. So for probably more of a formal mentor, there might be some money involved, but an informal mentor might be just a coffee catch up with somebody every few months. And generally you'll find most people really enjoy helping others. And if you reached out and said, for these reasons, I think it would be really useful to have a chat to you, and would you be free to talk to me and, start that conversation? And it might not be in that first conversation you say, hey, would you be open to being my mentor? It might be in conversations after that. But it can be both formal and informal, and there's programs out there that support both of those approaches. So that would be my piece of advice, is being clear on why you want that mentor, how they can help you, and then, searching for people who are out there that match that criteria and approaching them and just asking the question. And the worst thing is that they can say no, and that's okay. That's their decision. But, even taking those steps, you're miles ahead of everyone else, and there's always going to be somebody else who can help you as well.
Thanks for that, Hannah. That's some great advice. Our next question from Madeline. When working with young people, how do you teach them to grow their mindset? As an adult learning how to use it, how do we get kids to understand it too?
Yeah, that's a really good one, Madeline. And so in terms of teaching a growth mindset, there's a few different things to do, and I would probably point you in the direction of a researcher and a bit of a pracademic, I suppose, too, is Carol Dweck, who coined that term. And there's a lot of schools, etc., in the United States who have, different approaches for developing a growth mindset. But things in terms of it's the language that we use. So it might be encouraging and focusing on, somebody who has just perhaps done an exam or got their school report back and done quite well. For example, a child, and they brought home that night their school report, they've totally aced it. So instead of going, that was awesome, that, you got an A plus, an A plus, an A plus. So instead of focusing on that outcome, we would probably more want to focus on, with a growth mindset of, well, you put in so much time and effort, and you stayed up late doing your homework, you got your assignments in on time. So focusing on those processes and that time, that effort, perhaps even bring up that it's not always going to be easy. So focusing on those kinds of things rather than just focusing on that A plus, A plus, A plus. So that's just kind of one little tip that I'll touch upon this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. But also, remembering that word yet. So adding that onto the end of sentences. I can't run fast yet. I can't do maths yet. Though that kind of approach just opens the door. Can be two really useful things, and I encourage you to look up Carol Dweck if you want to have some further reading around growth mindsets.
Thanks, Hannah. Our next question from Julie. Do you have any particular knowledge or experience or research results or advice for me as a teacher for children with autism?
Great question, Julie. I haven't worked so much in a wellbeing space in terms of kids with autism. Like, I know there's definitely people out there in that space. Like, my initial reaction is to, let's work on a strengths-based approach. Let's focus on what these kids can do first, rather than what they can't do. And be perhaps quite creative in terms of our approaches. So, for example, my half sister, she has severe autism, and it was a really big struggle for my dad for a really long time in terms of that communication piece. And it was only a couple of years ago where they just decided to start using an iPad with her. And that has just opened up a whole new world in terms of going from communicating through yes or no to now like full sentences and saying, include me in the conversation, and anxiety's decreased because she can communicate and be understood. So I would say potentially technology plays a role in that for you. Also that strengths-based approach. But yeah, I'm not fully qualified in that space. So there would be my two tips.
Thanks, Hannah. Our next question. I want to have a positive mindset for losing weight. How do I do this with my stressful life?
Yeah, that's thanks, Vanda, for that question. That's a big one. So in terms of weight loss and a positive mindset, again, let's bring it back to, well, why do you want to lose weight in the first place? Is it to feel good? Is it to identifying that why is really critical. Is it to feel good? Is it to be able to participate in an event? Identifying that why for you, and focusing on perhaps that why and how you can live and breathe that will be helpful when you do make just those small daily decisions. Also, a few other things around that. We're all human beings. If we fall off the bandwagon, for sure we probably might beat ourselves up, but let's not stay on that too long. Let's perhaps use some of those skills, those tools that we've talked about today, whether it be practicing gratitude, giving to other people, practicing some mindfulness, going out with our friends, etc. Using those tools to increase our happiness if we do fall off the bandwagon. Another piece of advice is, don't bring your enemies home. So if you know you're a sucker for chocolate, like I am, then don't buy it. Like if it's not in the house, then it's a lot harder to eat, yeah? So don't bring the enemies home in that sense.
Thanks, Hannah. We're almost running out of time, so we'll just do our last question. What are your thoughts on the connection between food, nutrition, and well-being?
Thanks, Bianca. That's a massive one, and we could spend another few hours on that one. What we put into food is medicine. There is so much connection between what we eat and the impact on our mood, how we feel, and then how we fuel our bodies as well, even down to how we eat. Is really critical. So slowing down a little bit when we're eating can help us to absorb the nutrients of our food, and therefore we can increase our own health even just through that small mechanism. Personally, we just recently had the world champs in Italy, and to celebrate, I had a gluten-free pizza and some gelato afterwards, and we needed that celebration. But I felt like crap the next day. Far out, really noticed it. So that there is a massive link there. We're all interconnected in terms of our minds, our bodies, our mental, physical, emotional health. It's all interconnected, and we can't talk about one without talking about or considering the other. Massive connection there, and apologies we didn't have time to talk about that awesome topic any further.
Thanks, Hannah. And I'll just add to that, Bianca, we have done a seminar presentation on can we improve our mental health by improving our diet, presented by Felice Jacker. That presentation is available on our website, so I'd encourage you to go check that out. So that's all we have time for today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This session was recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in about 2 weeks. And if you have any feedback, you can write to us at deakinalumni@deakin.edu.au. Thanks so much, Hannah, for joining us today, and a big thank you for all your great questions to our audience tuning in live today. Have a great day, everyone, and we hope you can join us again next time.